This video will deal with project planning, the project planning process. Now you'll see from the bottom right hand corner of the video that there are 130 slides. Now that is a lot of slides. So therefore we recommend strongly that you stop the video from time to time, have a break, stop the video, make notes, wind it forwards, wind it backwards. Perhaps leave the video and return to it on the following day or on a separate occasion. Do it in stages. Don't try to take it all on in the same sitting. It is a long video. There are many different aspects to it, and each of them needs to be recorded and understood, and the way in which project planning processes are undertaken, the logic in which they're undertaken, should be clearly understood. So it's very advisable to have breaks, turn off the video, come back to it later and pick it up and start again. That's the advantage of using videos for video lectures. We can always stop it and return later. But let's deal with the material and get started. We're looking at project planning, and the project planning phase is the detailed planning of the project. So in project planning, as you'd expect, there must be quite a detailed setup, looking at the project, looking at all of the different aspects of the project, looking at the timings, the costs and so on, trying to get a picture of what's involved in the project itself. Now we'll be going through more or less each of these in this class. So it's important that we know the type of issues that are going to be confronted and the sequence in which they will be dealt with. This stage puts the project into action and ready for the execution phase. So when we think of a project, we think of it starting, the initiation phase. We think of it coming into existence, but then the project has to be planned, and once it's planned and once all of the issues are discussed and ironed out, it can then be executed. It can then be run in practice. But in order to avoid pitfalls and unnecessary costs, it's important to have a good planning phase. So this is where this particular class fits. It's necessary to have a good planning phase to mitigate problems and issues that may arise subsequently when the project is being run in practice, when it's been executed. So planning is very important. Project planning involves a series of activities or steps in order to paint a picture of the overall project outline and its requirements. So the project must be set out, if you like, in theory, set out on paper, with experienced personnel, experienced project managers and experienced members of the team, looking critically at the proposals and looking at just at the early stages, looking at the paper and deciding this should go there and that should go before that, and so that a logical sequence is worked out, and then that forms the basis of subsequent discussions, and this is before anything happens in practice. This is the planning phase. So all of the various steps must be identified and the sequence of steps set out. Which goes first, which comes next, what follows what, where does it go. So a complete picture of the project is worked out on paper, and then it can be tried out in practice. But putting the project into practice is expensive. So a good way to avoid that expense is to have experienced personnel plan it out carefully on paper before it is subject to build and subsequent costs. So we start with the project plan. Well, here we will look at the project title. What is the project? It must have a title. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set out all of the phases of a project plan here on this slide, and then we're going to go through each one of these in the subsequent videos, in the subsequent slides. And that's why we have 130 slides in this class. It's a long process. Well, we start with the project title. Then we look at the project scope, the project objectives and deliverables. Deliverables are the outcomes of the project. Look at the costs, the cost analysis. Look at any risks involved. Look at the resources and how the resources are used. The costs, the big areas of cost, the smaller areas of cost, how all the costs are linked. Look at the organization of the project, who's in charge, who does what, who's responsible for what. Look at the structure, how it's broken down. So have a design for that. Look at the time schedule. When is it due to be produced? When is the outcome expected? When do management, let's say it's a project within a particular company, when do the top management want the results? Now if we start at the first one, the project title, and this is what I'm going to go through. I'm going to go through this project plan setup in the remaining slides. We'll go through each one of them, and we'll start with the project title. So the project title, well, ensure the project has a title. It may sound trivial, but sometimes projects they don't have a title. It's just something that people do. It would be more efficient if it did have a title, so it could be archived later, filed away, and easily retrieved because there is a title associated. The name of the project manager should be agreed at a very early stage, because it's the project manager who's going to marshal all of the resources, get the team together, assign responsibilities, make sure that the project is on time, it's also within budget, it's achieving what was expected. So having a project manager, naming a project manager at an early stage is very important. And also, who are the project sponsors? Who is it who commissioned the project? What's the purpose of the project? Who wanted it? And to some extent, why is it wanted? Now, if we move to the second point, the project scope. Well, discuss the project scope and purpose in more detail. Why are you conducting the project? Why is this project being undertaken? What's the rationale? What's the purpose of it? What's it trying to achieve? Clearly set out what it's trying to achieve. How is the project related to the organization, their goals and strategic direction? How important is the project, in other words, within the organization? Is it very important because it's going to enable the organization to meet some strategic goals? Or is it just a project which is perhaps a minor project which is going to facilitate some aspect of the work process within the organization? So what's the importance of the project? Where does it fit in the scheme of things within the organization? Does it have high priority or very low priority? Provide key information in this section. Look at the project deadline. When is it due? And is it a reasonable deadline for what's expected? Look at the key milestones. What should be achieved by certain dates? It could be that prototyping will have to take place. When will the prototyping take place? And if there are issues arising out of it that need correction, when will that remedial work be completed? Again, another milestone. And of course, the ultimate milestone is the project must be delivered within the timescale set by management. Provide a brief outline of the resource requirements. What's required to build this project? Perhaps this would be a brief outline because it will be dealt with in other sections of this report. But having a brief outline here, it underpins what we're saying about the scope of the project. If the project has significant resources and significant resource requirements, then the chances are it is a major project, and it's a major project whose scope is very important to the management. It's important for perhaps even the survival of the business. So a brief outline of the resource requirements would be useful at this stage. Look at the project members and their responsibilities. Who will be involved in the project? Well, we've said already the project manager, but there may be others. There may be engineers, accountants, production personnel, marketing expertise may be brought in. There may be even HRM people involved because there may be training implications. So it may cut across all of the operational functions of the business. There may be personnel drawn from different departments, and each will bring their own expertise to bear on the project. So there should be a list of project members and their responsibilities. What is it they will be responsible for? Look at the costs and budget also. Look at the costs of the different functions that have to be performed within the project. And look at the budget that's been allocated overall, and see at an early stage if there are issues, if the overall allocated budget is realistic in the context of what the project manager knows about costs in practice. So have some statement about costs and budget, and try to assess the implications of a shortfall on the budget, or try to work out if the budget is realistic in the context of what's expected. Next, look at the project objectives and deliverables. By deliverables we mean the outcomes. Now explain the project objectives. Ensure objectives are SMART. Now this is just an anagram which is quite trendy within business and management education, but it's a very useful anagram because it focuses the mind, and it is relevant in the context of what we're dealing with here. It's not just added in. So when we talk about project objectives and deliverables, we have to make sure that the project objectives are SMART. Now by SMART, each letter here, it's an anagram as I said, each letter here represents something. We'll go across this. In fact, there are separate videos on the course on SMART. But the first one we have is specific. You see it's S, first letter. So specific. In other words, make sure that the objectives are focused. They're not rambling all over the place. They're not generalized. If they're generalized, the personnel involved in the project will not be focused either. They'll be doing some of this and some of that, and it won't make a lot of sense. But if they are very specific, this is the task, this is what must be completed, this is when it's required, then that is the task. It's a very specific task. And that will concentrate the minds of those working on the project to achieve that particular task. It's very specific, very focused. It should be measurable, the second letter, M. So it should be measurable. If it's not measurable, there's no way of knowing if the task has been achieved. It's as simple as that. If it's measurable, then the project manager can say that the task has been completed, or it's 90% completed, or it'll be completed in a week, or whatever. But it must be measurable. If it's not measurable, there's no way of gauging whether the task has been completed or not. It's not measurable, so it should be. And that will again focus the minds and will enable the project to move. It'll enable the project to make progress. The tasks must be achievable. If we set people tasks which are not achievable, it'll cause frustration and annoyance, and they will give up. They will stop trying because they can't achieve it. The project is asking for the impossible. So whatever tasks come out of the project, they must be achievable. They must be realistic as well. Realistic means that they are not fanciful. They are not aspirations. They are not pipe dreams. They are realistic. They are based on what can be done given the resources and within the time scale that's been allocated. So they are realistic outcomes. And it is time-based. In other words, there is a start and there is an end. It's not open-ended. It doesn't start at some time and nobody has set the end date. There is an end point, and the end point is what drives the efforts. It drives the team to try and achieve what is required. That's the SMART view. And as I said, there are several videos on SMART elsewhere on the course, which you may have encountered. It's important that the team be prepared to explain key deliverables. What will the project deliver? What will be the outcome of the project? Again, it's pointless to say that it's just going to complete and there's no obvious outcome. If there's no obvious outcome, what was the whole project about? Why did it happen? So it's essential that there is an outcome, a deliverable, and the project is working towards delivering that particular outcome. Now, cost analysis. Well, identify key costs for the project and how they benefit the project. It's important to identify the key costs because these are the ones which will need to be constantly policed and monitored and checked. It's essential that the key costs are closely scrutinized. But all costs need to be monitored as well. There should not be drift across any of the costs, in fact, but it's just some items are particularly expensive, particularly costly to do, and they will need more attention. Provide a summary cost-benefit analysis. Well, look at each activity and talk about the cost of the activity, but the benefit that particular activity has brought to the project. Talk about what resources were absorbed in the activity, but what were the benefits, to try and justify that particular expenditure. Try to account for the expenditure in terms of the benefits that it brings to the project. And state the budget for the project. Constantly mention the budget, because it's essential that the project is brought in at budget or just under budget. If it's the case that the budget is too low, then that should be worked out in advance, flagged up to management that the project is not feasible because of financial constraints. But once it's agreed, then the project should be brought in within that budget. Explain budget utilization and control. Explain how the budget is utilized. Explain how each part of the process will be costed. Explain how the items will be ordered and the costs will be entered into the budget. How variances will be dealt with on the budget, whether there's over expenditure or under expenditure on certain items. Try to explain why there are variances, if there are any, on the budget. And try to control expenditure so that it comes in within the agreed allocation. Now, risk assessment. Well, produce a risk assessment plan explaining all likely problems which can hinder the success of the project. Right at the outset, try to anticipate what issues can kill the project, what issues can damage the project or cause a setback, perhaps an increase in costs or even the termination of the project. What issues need to be looked at? Provide an assessment of risk and uncertainty and preventative measures. Look at risks and uncertainty. There is a difference between risk and uncertainty, which is dealt with in other videos on the course, but essentially risk has a probability of happening. We may be able to work out the probability, or it may be a subjective probability. But uncertainty, we have no idea of what's going to happen next. In a sense, the world in which we live has a lot of uncertainty. We're not sure about what's going to happen tomorrow, what will be the headline of the news tomorrow. So try to provide a risk and uncertainty for the project, a statement relating to risk and uncertainty. Try to mention what could happen, what's likely to happen in the case of this project, and what adverse factors could arise. And if they do arise, how can they be dealt with? The purpose of the assessment ensures all unforeseen circumstances have been considered and plans are in place to prevent such accidents from occurring. It almost sounds contradictory that we have planned for unforeseen circumstances. But what we're trying to do here is we're trying to itemize as many problems that may arise in the future as possible and have contingencies. Should those issues arise, how can they be dealt with? So that's what I mean by dealing with unforeseen circumstances. It means trying to itemize what may happen and then having some plans that should that arise, this is the way to deal with it. Not to get confused because there is no plan or it's totally there was a situation where the project team were totally unprepared for what happened. They should be prepared. They should have some contingencies. Now, risk assessment. Well, risks can be internal or external. The environment have an impact on projects. Costs of materials may arise or vary. There may be shortages of particular skilled labourers or labour with particular competencies. It may be internal. It may be that the project will have to be fitted in around a very busy operational schedule that the business is undertaking. and that it just has to be programmed as and when it can happen. And that can lead to frustration, and could eventually lead to the death of the project because it was not adequately resourced in terms of personnel, time, or even the budget. There could be conflicts within project teams or between project teams. There can be differences of opinion about what's the right way forward. Someone has got a strong idea that the project will be advanced if the following happens, but other people disagree. Now, certainly time will be taken to try and resolve the differences. But it could be that the differences are irreconcilable. If they can't be reconciled, then the project could be damaged. So differences between teams, there's a potential risk of damage to the project there. Could also be because of technical failures. Simply, when they settle down to do the project, they find that it can't be done. That for technical reasons, it just can't be done. It was a good idea, except the technology is not available or the technology is not suitable to perform this particular function. So it could be technical failures. There could be insufficient budget or over expenditure. And that's a risk. Insufficient budget means the top management want the project, but they don't want to allocate a big budget to it. That would be wasteful. On the other hand, if they under allocate, the project may get so far and run out of resources. And that's a risk also. And there should be contingency to deal with that. There could be missed deadlines. Sometimes the project manager may not be strong enough to try and get the team to adhere to deadlines. These milestone events that should be ticked off on a certain date according to the schedule. If they're missed, there may be slippage and the project may drift slightly. And once it starts to drift, there may be a lack of control, a lack of motivation within the team, and the project manager may have extra problems in trying to get it back on track, and in fact may not be able to get it back on track, so that there is a risk there. Could be because subcontractors have made mistakes with supply. They don't quite understand what was required, so they gave a product which they thought was intended, but it was not quite right. Working with subcontractors means that the subcontractors have to be briefed precisely as to what the requirements are, and there may be issues there. Conduct a pestel, issues concerning the political, legal, social, technical, economic and environmental, and see what issues are thrown up from that. Look at the environmental issues. The project, when it's completed and brought in line, let's say, will it have adverse environmental effects? Will it create waste, or will it improve the environmental footprint of the business? Look at the social, look at the technical, and so on. So perform a pestel. Pestel is the subject of many videos elsewhere on the course as well. So we've got down to resource analysis. We got down to resource analysis, number 6. Now, what key resources will be required to ensure successful completion of the project? Also, what resources are absolutely vital? So itemize those. These are central. If they are not available, the project cannot happen. So look at the key resources. And how will those key resources be utilized? How will they be used? Sometimes the resources may be linked. It may be that the project will need a certain piece of capital equipment, but it'll also need skilled operators to work with that capital, that piece of machinery, let's say. And how will it be utilized? Will it be utilized full-time, part-time, as and when required? How will it work? Will it be brought into the project on a full-time basis? Will it be commissioned within the workplace from an existing machine, as and when required, as I said earlier? So how will it be utilized? Now, resources, well, resources we can include under time, financial resources, money in other words, people, equipment, and I'm sure we could extend that list to include other things. People could be broken down into people with particular skills and competencies, so we could have a whole list of those people required, the types of equipment, the space for the project, where it will take place, the time that is going to be dedicated to the project, who will complete the tasks of the people who are working on the project, since they've been taken away from their more routine, perhaps, activities within the business. So just look at the resources included and try to get a realistic assessment of the costs of the project and make a statement regarding that. Next is cost. Well, provide cost estimates and budget requirements. It's essential that the project manager has a good understanding of costs, the cost of the raw materials, of the labour, the machinery, the space within the business for the project to be undertaken. Look at all of the costs, the overheads and so on. Look at these and provide good cost estimates and talk about what is the allocation required in order to successfully complete this task. Obviously, it's in the interest of senior management not to over-allocate the budget, because that would be wasteful. But under allocating could lead to a failure of the project, or costly subsequent meetings to try and patch together additional resources to try and bring in the project. How much will the project overall will it cost? And it's important to keep in mind people costs, equipment, contractors, technical and general expenses, travel. So looking at costs, it's important that all of the headings, realistic headings that may be involved in this particular project, are set out, and the likely costs for each of them totted up, so that there is a good overall picture of what the cost of the project will be. And that should be used as a basis for the budget allocation. Now, project organization and structure. Well, the project organization and structure, detailed overview of the project structure. For example, project review meetings, who will be responsible for arranging the meetings. So the project should have someone who will convene the meeting, to look after the minutes of the meetings, will disseminate information, act as a conduit for good communications, and will enable more information to circulate around the project team, so that they know what's happening, they know where their part fits, and whether they're behind in their delivery or whether they're on time, the quality that is expected of them. So there should be detailed overview of the project structure. Also, how will the project be organized? For example, the names of team members responsible for project tasks. It may be simply all of the different tasks are listed out and then names allocated to the various tasks. But the project must be controlled, and in order for it to be controlled, there must be an allocation of responsibilities that are required for the project and issued against team members' names. So perhaps a list of the various activities required and an associated list of names who will work on those individual tasks. Who to report to for any project issues or grievances. Who are the key contributors? So the project should have an organizational structure. There should be someone in charge, the project manager, and under the project manager perhaps there should be others who will also deal with issues. Depends on the scale of the project, of course. If it's a very large project, there may be one project manager, a very senior person, and then there may be other project managers who report to him or her according to what's happening in their particular part of the project. And then at the end it's all fitted together. But it's important to know who is in charge and who will deal with issues, day-to-day issues, when they arise. Now, time schedule. There are different techniques used to plan, organize, monitor and control projects. A list of them would be Gantt charts, work breakdown structure, critical path analysis, PERT, milestone scheduling. There's a list, and these are again subject matter of videos elsewhere in the course. But just in order to relate to this particular topic, let's have a look at a few of them. Start with Gantt chart. Gantt charts were introduced by Henry Gantt. They're a common technique used for planning projects. When we think of planning projects, we generally speaking think of Gantt charts. A Gantt chart displays tasks and estimated deadlines. The aim of a Gantt chart is to list all the tasks required for project completion. So the Gantt chart starts with the very start of the project, right to the very end, breaks down all of the different tasks, when they will start, when they will finish, when the work moves from one section to the next section, and so on. So it breaks down the whole the task into subtasks with start and completion dates. Each task is allocated with a deadline. This then projects a possible project completion date. So each small task has a deadline. It has a start and an end date. It fits in with the task that's coming up. It's contributing towards the overall project. All of them are doing that, so all of them are heading towards the completion of the project. Each task listed in a Gantt chart must be completed within the expected deadline. So it's important that each task is achieved within that deadline. Each individual within the group is able to see the Gantt chart and their tasks. So everyone knows exactly what they're doing, where they're working, when their task started, and when their task will end. And they must meet those deadlines. A Gantt chart should display tasks in order. For example, completion of one task leads to another task. So when one ends, it's passed over onto a new task and it moves on from there. If we look at one in practice, it may look something like that. This is taken from Lock 2007. So we have number of days across the top, and we have task descriptions on the vertical axis, on the vertical column on the left. So here we have an anatomical study for a chair. Someone's going to make a chair. They want to know what it is that chairs should have in terms of design, which is good for posture and good for us to use. So there will be a study, and the study will run 16 days. You can see the black line along the top against anatomical study for chair. It runs to 16. But having completed that study, now we know what a chair should look like and what properties it should have and what design it should have. It's passed over to design the chair, which should be completed by day 20. And by day 20, we've got a design for the chair. Then it's necessary to buy materials for the chair seat. And these will start on, well, the end of day 20 and finish at the end of day 26. You can see where all of this is moving and how it's moving. If you look at the very final line, I just put the cursor onto the screen for a moment, on here. If you just look down here at the very last one, final project evaluation, this one here, you'll see that, just move it across again, you can see here we go, this is the end. So by day 44 it should be completed. Gantt charts are widely used, very important management tools, because they plan out exactly when everything's happening. If it's not happening according to the plan, it should instigate some investigation by management, some inquiry into what's happened, what's gone wrong, why is particular deadlines not being met. So it ensures that there is constant managerial intervention to make sure that the output is met according to the schedule. A work breakdown structure, again dealt with elsewhere, but WBS is a technique used to manage projects by subdividing sections of the project into manageable size, task, time frame, responsibility, work packages. So it breaks down projects into subsections and then looks at the management of each of the subsections. Of course, ultimately bringing all of the subsections together for the completed project. But it's breaking down the structure into small units. But they should be logical. There should be coherence amongst them. Some will be heavily based on design, some will be based on production, some will be based on the aesthetics of the product, and others will look at environmental issues or whatever it is. So there is a breakdown of the problem into smaller tasks. They will be worked on separately and then assembled into the final project. Breaking tasks down into components makes planning resources efficient, easier to predict and make estimates, assign work to individuals or departments. So breaking the tasks down makes everything, it makes it smaller and it makes it more comprehensible. So the workers will know exactly, those working on the project will now know exactly what their responsibilities are. That particular task, complete that, and that is a contribution towards the project. So the team will be made up from sub-layers, each one contributing overall to the project. Work breakdown structure improves productivity and efficient allocation of resources. It's the backbone of planning and control. Breaking down the structure, looking at smaller components and aspects of the task, completing those, and then adding them together to make the final project. It enables more efficiency, more control, more involvement as well from the key team, from the project manager and from the project manager's team. They're able to look at particular parts of the project and fit those together. It's very similar to building a machine, and the machine is made up from different components. The components are first of all produced and later assembled into the machine, and we'll see an example of this later here. It enables the project manager to review workload and what needs to be achieved. So it has a very positive impact on the completion of projects. Control and monitoring is easier as WBS is illustrated in a diagrammatic structure. All tasks are monitored and sequenced. So it's a very useful process. Break down excuse me, the bigger project into smaller projects, smaller subsections if you like, and deal with those, and then later reassemble into the main project. WBS is represented in a hierarchical structure, a subdivision of tasks. So we can imagine it as different tasks being performed, then moving up to a higher level, and these being performed, and then finally all brought together to complete the project. Let's have a look at a diagram put forward by Burke in 2007. Now, this is a very useful diagram, a very good diagram, indeed from quite a good book. Here the project is to build a yacht. So they're going to build a yacht, and to do this they are going to have a boat builder, a mechanical engineer, and a rigger. Rigger being dealing with how the boat is designed to use, let's say, wind power. So the boat builder will build the hull and the bulkheads, the decks and the superstructure. The boat builder will in effect build the boat. But the mechanical engineer will look at the main engine and the steering and all of the technical parts of the boat. So whilst the boat builder is building the boat, the mechanical engineer is getting on with looking at the main engine and looking at steering and controls and all that goes into the boat, all the technical side of the boat. And the rigger is looking at putting on a mast for sails and getting the sails. So the rigger is working separately. The work is broken down. So it's a work breakdown situation. The rigger is doing that. The mechanical engineer is working on his or her own, looking at the main engine, the steering and so on. And the boat builder is working on his or her own, looking at the hull, the bulkhead, the decks, the different compartments of the ship. And finally, they're all brought together into the yacht. Now let's look at critical path analysis. I'm not going to go through critical path analysis in great detail. It's the subject matter of separate videos, and it can be quite complex. So I'm not going to deal with it here. This is a long class. I want to give an overview of critical path analysis. It's also known as network analysis. It's a technique to schedule work to minimize time. It looks at all the tasks to be completed and links them together to show dependency between the various tasks. It also finds the most efficient way to produce the output. So it links the various tasks together, it shows which one comes first, which one comes next, and then it tries to find what is the best way of producing. What is the best way of proceeding with this. So it uses ideas like activities and nodes. Activities require time and resources. And in terms of critical path analysis, in terms of critical path analysis, these are joined together with an arrow. It shows which depends on which. So which activity depends on which activity. Nodes, well, networks always start and end with a node. And nodes are represented by circles. So we've got starting and ending points, which are nodes, and activities, which go from one to the other. So an example, an engineering company wishes to develop a new product. Activity A is the design phase, which is 8 weeks. So it starts with the node, which is at the end point, and it moves to the next, to the end of the design phase, 8 weeks. So that's activity A. Activity A is 8 weeks. Activity B is 22 weeks. And that moves from the middle node to the final node. Very simple. Except, as I said, critical path analysis is doing a much more sophisticated job. It's possible that some activities may be carried out simultaneously. For example, design and prototyping. We'll call this AA. So here's node 1, the start. Node 2, the design and prototyping. These could be carried out simultaneously. So the design is 8 weeks and the prototyping is 11 weeks. So you can see that the two don't really add up there, and this would be the issue that critical path analysis would deal with in terms of its own techniques, which, as I said, is the subject matter of a separate video. But here we would have slack. We'd have slack of 3 weeks. So the design team would complete their work in 8 weeks, but the prototyping team will take 11. Therefore, the design team will have 3 weeks in which they seem to be doing nothing. It's slack. Well, that would be wasteful, so it's a question of finding ways around this. But that moves us from node 1 to node 2. And at node 2 we have B, activity B, which is some other activity, which takes 19 weeks, and that gets us to node 3. Another way of writing this is in a diagram like that, where node 1 is indicated in the inside the circle, which is node 1. Node 2 is inside that circle, and the number 3 is inside the final node, the final circle. So it just moves, it just tidies it up a little, and that's the more general way of writing it. So it tells you where it starts, what node it's going to, how long it's taken to get there. With critical path analysis, it's trying to find the best route, and sometimes the diagrams can be very sophisticated with many nodes and many processes running in parallel, not all of the same timings. So It's a question of working out which is the best way forward, the one which will minimize the time taken by the project. PERT. Well, this is called the Program Evaluation and Review Technique, PERT. It's a project management tool commonly used alongside critical path analysis. PERT focuses on the time element within a project. It's a planning and scheduling technique which analyzes realistic time measures. So it focuses on time to try and work out the best way in which projects can be worked out so as to minimize the time dimension. It's designed to ensure that flexible planning has been accounted within the project. So flexible planning where, in other words, the plan can be amended and changed as circumstances change within the project, and it's done so as to optimize the resources that are at the project's disposal, but also to minimize the time taken. Using PERT as a planning tool requires the following: a list of all specific activities relevant to the project. So all the activities relevant to the project must be stated. That should be categorized. The activities should be categorized into sequences. What goes first, what goes second, what's important, what's the last one, and so on. Devise a network analysis. In other words, show how all the different parts fit together. Identify time durations. Time durations must be considered based on most likely, most optimistic, most pessimistic. And these three separations are quite common. Sometimes management talk about a project being deliverable on a certain time, and that's the most optimistic. That's one which they can almost guarantee. That's most optimistic. But they may have some issues, some breakdown problems or personnel problems, so they might have some issues which they'll have to put forward a most pessimistic scenario as well, which means it will be delivered a long time in the future. And they may put forward a most likely. In other words, it's a compromise between the most optimistic and the most pessimistic. It's the most likely. And that'll be their best guess, their best estimate. And with PERT, it's important to establish a critical path. So critical path analysis and PERT tend to go together. Now, milestones. Well, milestones identify a special event within a project life. These events are considered important and play a key role in project planning and management. Milestones are big events when something within the project has been completed, some big issue has been completed, so the project can now move on to the next stage. That's a milestone because that big event has been completed. Milestones are not activities. They are events within a project and do not take up any time. So they are really indicators of the completion of some phase of the project. And the milestone is when something is done so that there is a changeover from one line of activity to the next. In other words, that old line of activity is now done, it's completed, so it's important now to switch over onto the next activity and move on. But the milestones are not activities. They are just, in a sense, the indicators. The milestone events are indicators that one has come to an end and a new one is starting. The purpose of identifying milestones is to ensure projects stay on schedule and key activities are managed effectively. it's important that projects are on schedule, and in order to do that, management set up these milestones. In other words, they look for events. Once that's done, that's a clear indication that that part is finished. That's a milestone, and that milestone should occur at that week and at that time, and then we move on to the next stage. So it's achieving that milestone. It's once that has been reached and completed, the project has moved into a different phase. Milestones schedule is transferred to a summary level schedule, which enables project managers and team members identify major events within the project. It's a summary of the schedule. In other words, everything up to that phase, up to that time, has been completed, and it should have been completed effectively and properly. Once that's done, that can be then set aside because it's completed, set aside, and then activities on the next stage or the next phase can take place. And the separating point is the milestone. Milestones on a Gantt chart are represented as a symbol, usually a diamond next to an activity marked as a key event. So they can be indicated on Gantt charts. When you look at Gantt charts in more detail, you'll find in some of the more sophisticated Gantt charts that these diamonds are there. Some milestones have a brief description in a milestone box next to the event. So some of them are just indicated that within the project, this is the milestone, or these are the milestones, and that's how we'll know when we got to this particular milestone. This is how we will recognize it. And been a long video, but those are the resources that we consulted in the preparation of the video, and that's all we're going to deal with here. We're going to leave it at that. Please stop the video from time to time, go back over it, restart it from time to time, look ahead again, make your own notes, think about, do your own research. But that's all we're going to deal with here. So thank you for watching.